Welcome to InfoStream, your daily current. Unsure what to listen to? Turn to us for today's headlines. Stay informed. Trade tensions eased with a U.S.-China deal framework. Diplomatic efforts spurred a new trade agreement. Food stamp benefits face shutdown risks. A government shutdown looms. Milei's victory pushes for austerity. The Argentine economy anticipates positive market trends. Gaza hostage recovery efforts continue. Negotiations intensify for hostage releases. Hurricane Melissa impacts the Caribbean. Severe weather poses a significant threat. U.S. Navy aircraft crashes in the South China Sea. The incident complicates regional tensions. Trump's influence grows at the Asean Summit. Challenges remain for the U.S. in Southeast Asia. Venezuela accuses the U.S. of plotting an overthrow. Military activity increases in Venezuela. U.S. strategy gains traction in Latin America. Support for Trump's approach expands. NNSA shutdown jeopardizes nuclear security. Concerns arise about security protocols. Thailand confronts U.S. tariffs and export issues. Trade disputes create economic difficulties. Russia's escalation fuels diplomatic concerns. The international community grapples with Russia's actions. IS cells persist in Syria's ongoing conflict. The struggle against extremism continues. India and China restore direct flights. Relations between the two nations show signs of improvement. U.S. and China reach trade deal framework amidst diplomatic efforts. In recent developments indicate a significant shift in U.S.-China trade relations, culminating in the agreement of a preliminary trade deal framework alongside broader diplomatic efforts. Key to this progress is a commitment to address several long-standing disputes, most notably concerning rare earth mineral export controls and the ongoing trade war. U.S. Treasury Secretary Michael Besant confirmed the framework's existence, stating that a final deal has been reached on TikTok's U.S. operations and that China will defer the implementation of tightened rare earth controls for a year, allowing for a re-examination. This decision directly responds to concerns raised by U.S. manufacturers reliant on these materials. Furthermore, the agreement includes a resumption of substantial soybean purchases from the United States, alleviating concerns for American farmers who had previously faced a Chinese boycott during the trade war's escalation. Besant expressed optimism regarding the impact on farmers, anticipating a positive outlook for the upcoming seasons. Alongside these core developments, U.S. President Donald Trump's ongoing diplomatic tour of Asia, including meetings with Japanese and South Korean leaders, has facilitated discussions aimed at fostering improved trade relations. A very good meeting between Trump and Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva also occurred, with Lula expressing confidence that a trade agreement between the two nations will soon be reached, following the lifting of U.S. tariffs imposed on Brazil earlier this year. Trump's tariff actions, initially levied against Brazil, stemmed from the country's trial against former President Jair Bolsonaro, who was subsequently convicted of plotting a coup. The U.S. president softened his tone during the meeting, signaling a willingness to prioritize constructive dialogue. Both leaders emphasized the importance of democratic values and free trade, highlighting their respective roles as key players in the Western Hemisphere. The agreement represents a crucial step toward de-escalating tensions and promoting economic cooperation between the world's two largest economies. The government shutdown threatens food stamp benefits. A crisis unfolds. A protracted U.S. government shutdown is creating a severe crisis for millions of Americans reliant on the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, USNAP, also known as food stamps. The shutdown, now in its 26th day, has halted the distribution of November benefits, leaving families facing potential food insecurity. The USDA has ceased using its $6 billion contingency fund to cover SNAP payments, citing a lack of congressional action. This decision is largely due to the ongoing impasse between Democrats and Republicans over broader spending priorities, particularly healthcare. Key figures involved include President Donald Trump, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, USDA Secretary Brooke Rollins, and numerous congressional Democrats and Republicans. The White House's reluctance to utilize the contingency fund has been a central point of contention, with critics accusing the administration of deliberately withholding aid to leverage political pressure. Democrats are vehemently opposing the shutdown, framing it as a callous attempt to weaponize hunger to force concessions on their healthcare agenda. They argue that the administration possesses the necessary funds, approximately $500 billion, to fully fund SNAP, highlighting the moral imperative to protect vulnerable populations. Hakeem Jeffries repeatedly emphasized the urgency, asserting that the administration's actions are unsustainable and unconscionable, and Republican lawmakers, while acknowledging the hardship, are largely blaming the Democrats for the impasse. Some, like Missouri Sen. Josh Hawley, are introducing legislation to address the situation, but acknowledge procedural hurdles. Several GOP senators, including Roger Marshall, have expressed concerns about the impact on pregnant women and breastfeeding mothers who rely on SNAP benefits. The situation is further complicated by the White House's decision to prioritize a $20 billion bailout for Argentina, while SNAP program remains at risk. This has fueled accusations of hypocrisy and underscored the partisan divisions at the heart of the shutdown. The potential for millions of Americans to lose access to vital food assistance is driving intense pressure on both parties to find a resolution, but the path forward remains uncertain, with each side holding firm to its demands. The crisis highlights the profound impact of political gridlock on the lives of ordinary Americans. Javier Milei's landslide victory solidifies austerity agenda, fuels market optimism. Javier Milei and his La Libertad Avanza party secured a decisive victory in Argentina's midterm legislative elections, significantly bolstering his mandate to implement radical economic reforms and austerity measures. The party won nearly 41% of the vote, securing 13 Senate seats and 64 House of Deputies, dramatically expanding their influence in Congress. This outcome, coupled with a record low voter turnout of 67.9%, indicates widespread support for Milei's agenda despite concerns about its potential economic consequences. The election results were welcomed by U.S. President Donald Trump, who congratulated Milei and highlighted the potential for a continued partnership. The Trump administration offered a substantial financial lifeline, including a $20 billion currency swap and a proposed $20 billion debt investment facility, contingent on Milei's continued commitment to reforms. Milei's success stemmed largely from Argentina's desire to avoid the economic turmoil associated with past governments. The results empowered him to further curtail state spending, deregulate the economy, and control inflation, which had previously reached triple-digit levels. The victory also secured a third of the Senate, enabling him to prevent future presidential vetoes. The election's impact extended to financial markets, with bonds and stocks expected to rally upon Monday's opening. The significant reduction in inflation from 12.8% to 2.1% and the achievement of a fiscal surplus further boosted investor confidence. However, concerns remain about the potential for a peso devaluation due to the currency swap. Milei intends to reshape his cabinet, potentially incorporating members from the PRO party, a frequent ally in Congress. The election's outcome represents a major political shift, solidifying Milei's position as Argentina's leading figure and reinforcing his commitment to a transformative economic agenda. The political landscape has shifted dramatically, with Milei's party now holding a dominant position in the legislature. Gaza hostage recovery efforts intensify amidst diplomatic pressure. Recent developments in Gaza's hostage recovery efforts are marked by increased international involvement and mounting diplomatic pressure. The BBC reported that King Abdullah of Jordan believes international troops would not be accepted for enforcement within Gaza, emphasizing peacekeeping operations rather than active peace enforcement. Simultaneously, the BBC Panorama highlighted the ongoing efforts to evacuate sick and wounded Palestinian children, with over 5,000 medically evacuated, primarily to Egypt, the UAE, and Qatar, showcasing the humanitarian crisis within Gaza. Queen Rania expressed a persistent hope for a lasting peace, acknowledging the difficulty but advocating for international support. A BBC security correspondent reported that Egypt and the International Committee of the Red Cross, AICRC, have been granted access beyond the Yellow Line in Gaza to search for the remains of hostages taken during the October 7th attacks, a previously denied access. Hamas has transferred 13 Israeli and 2 non-Israeli hostages' bodies under the terms of the U.S.-brokered ceasefire, coordinating with Egyptian authorities. Donald Trump has urged Hamas to expedite the return of the bodies, threatening potential action if progress isn't made within 48 hours. The BBC further detailed the ICRC's crucial role in facilitating the handover of remains, emphasizing the difficulties Hamas faces in locating bodies amidst extensive rubble. Israeli authorities assert that Hamas possesses knowledge of the locations but has not fully utilized it. The Israeli government has placed a high value on facilitating humanitarian aid, including patient evacuations, while stressing the necessity of security checks for all individuals entering Israeli territory. Queen Rania's strong advocacy for international pressure on Israel, alongside the significant humanitarian efforts, underscores the complex and protracted nature of the conflict. The situation remains dire, with estimates indicating that up to 84% of Gaza's territory has been reduced to rubble. The focus now centers on the accelerated return of the remaining bodies and the continued provision of essential medical care and support to the displaced population. The Egyptian and Red Cross teams are working alongside Hamas, navigating a challenging and heavily damaged landscape in their efforts to bring closure to grieving families. El-Fasher escalating crisis and rebel gains in Sudan. The situation in El-Fasher, Sudan, continues to deteriorate dramatically, marked by escalating violence and a significant strategic gain by the Rapid Support Forces, RSF. Hundreds of thousands of civilians remain trapped within the city, facing immense suffering due to relentless bombardment, starvation, and a complete lack of access to food, healthcare, and safety. The RSF has effectively seized control of the city's army headquarters, the 6th Division headquarters, a pivotal victory that represents a turning point in the ongoing civil war. This loss is particularly significant as El-Fasher was the last major urban center in Darfur still under government control. The RSF, under the command of General Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, has been encircling El-Fasher for 18 months, constructing extensive earthen walls to trap civilians and subjecting the city to frequent attacks. The RSF's advance has resulted in the destruction of huge military vehicles and the capture of substantial military equipment within the seized headquarters, verified through circulating social media videos authenticated by BBC Verify. The humanitarian crisis within El-Fasher is severe, with residents enduring terrible escalation and witnessing massacred relatives. The UN estimates that hundreds of thousands are trapped and terrified, lacking essential resources. Accusations against the RSF include committing crimes against humanity and potentially genocide against Darfur's non-Arab population, supported by UN investigators. The strategic importance of El-Fasher is underscored by its role as the last major government stronghold in Darfur. The RSF's control of the city allows them to establish a rival government and solidifies their dominance over the region. The US has called for safe passage for civilians and is actively negotiating a ceasefire. The ongoing conflict, which began after a power struggle between the RSF and the Sudanese army in 2023, has resulted in over 150,000 deaths and the displacement of approximately 12 million people, creating one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. The RSF controls almost all of Darfur and much of the neighboring Kordofan region. Hurricane Melissa threatens devastation across Caribbean. Hurricane Melissa has rapidly intensified, posing a significant threat to Jamaica and surrounding Caribbean islands. As of Monday, the U.S. National Hurricane Center classified it as a Category 5 hurricane, representing the highest intensity level, with sustained winds reaching 165 dinars and 70 km. The storm is currently located 145 miles, 233 km southwest of Kingston, Jamaica, and is expected to strengthen further within the next 24 hours. Authorities in Jamaica have initiated widespread evacuations, particularly in vulnerable communities around Kingston, and the entire island has been designated as threatened. Prime Minister Andrew Holness has urged all residents to comply with evacuation orders, seek shelter in safe areas, and prepare for destructive winds and life-threatening storm surges. Forecasters predict a possibility of 40 inches, 100 cm of rainfall across Jamaica over the next 4 days, alongside the potential for catastrophic flash flooding and landslides. The storm's slow movement is exacerbating the danger, increasing the risk of prolonged and intense rainfall. Tragically, the impact of Melissa has already been felt on the island of Hispaniola. At least 3 fatalities have been confirmed, with 1 death in the Dominican Republic due to floodwaters, and a missing 13-year-old swept away by strong currents. Torrential rainfall has also resulted in widespread flooding, impacting hundreds of homes and forcing evacuations. Recognizing the impending danger, residents in Jamaica and tourists alike are taking precautionary measures. Many are stocking up on essential supplies and, in some cases, shortening their holiday trips. The situation remains dynamic, and continued monitoring by the NHC is crucial for accurate predictions and effective response efforts. The focus remains on protecting lives and mitigating the devastating effects of this extremely powerful hurricane across Jamaica and the wider Caribbean region. The storm is projected to move northward, impacting southern Hispaniola and eventually the southeastern Bahamas. U.S. Navy aircraft crashes in South China Sea amidst diplomatic efforts. 2 separate incidents involving U.S. Navy aircraft, a helicopter and a fighter jet, occurred in the South China Sea within a half-hour period, prompting a full investigation and highlighting ongoing tensions in the strategic waterway. The events transpired while President Donald Trump was undertaking a diplomatic tour of Asia, specifically focusing on trade negotiations with China. A U.S. Navy MH-60R Seahawk helicopter went down around 20:45 p.m. local time from the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz, followed by an FKA-80F Super Hornet crash approximately 30 minutes later, also from the same carrier. Remarkably, all 5 crew members involved in the accidents were safely recovered. The crashes have intensified scrutiny of operations within the South China Sea, a region claimed in its entirety by China and contested by several Southeast Asian nations, including Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia. China's assertive territorial claims and construction of military installations on artificial islands have long been a point of contention with the United States, which maintains a significant military presence to counter Chinese influence and safeguard freedom of navigation. President Trump attributed the incidents to a potential fuel problem and stated that the cause was likely to be determined soon. The USS Nimitz is one of the oldest U.S. aircraft carriers in service and is scheduled for retirement next year. The carrier strike group was in the South China Sea on its final leg of deployment back to the U.S. West Coast. Following the crashes, China's foreign ministry offered humanitarian assistance to the United States. Negotiations between U.S. and Chinese trade negotiators have been ongoing, addressing tariffs, shipping fees, fentanyl, and export controls, culminating in a framework agreement that will be finalized during a meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping. This diplomatic activity underscores the complex geopolitical landscape surrounding the South China Sea and the strategic importance of the region. The U.S. military is currently investigating the causes of the crashes while simultaneously pursuing diplomatic solutions to reduce regional tensions. Asean Summit: Trump's brief influence amidst persistent challenges. Donald Trump's visit to the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, Asean Summit in Kuala Lumpur, proved a strategically valuable, albeit temporary, boost for the regional bloc. Despite criticisms regarding Asean's effectiveness, particularly in addressing complex regional issues like Myanmar's civil war and air pollution, Trump's presence generated significant diplomatic opportunities and secured a notable achievement: the ceasefire between Thailand and Cambodia following a long-standing border dispute. This peace deal, though not resolving the underlying territorial issue, was hailed as a positive step toward de-escalation. Asean, established in 1967 as a counterweight to communism, functions primarily as a platform for dialogue and trade. Its strength lies in its ability to gather all regional leaders in one location, facilitating engagement. While the summit resulted in trade deals and exemptions for several Asian member states, including Malaysia and Vietnam, the bloc's core principle of non-interference in member states' internal affairs remains a significant limitation. This stance, championed by Asian advocates as crucial for maintaining unity, is viewed by critics as toothless, preventing decisive action on pressing crises. The Thai-Cambodia conflict highlighted Asean's vulnerability, showcasing the difficulty in compelling member states to prioritize the greater good over national sovereignty. The summit also saw calls for the Myanmar military junta to cease violence and ensure free and fair elections, requests largely ignored. Asean's inability to effectively address Myanmar's ongoing civil war is widely considered one of its greatest failures. Despite these ongoing challenges, the summit provided a valuable moment for Asean, particularly in leveraging Trump's attention to broaden engagement and secure tangible outcomes. The success with Thailand and Cambodia, though temporary, underscored the potential for Asean to utilize external pressure, demonstrating a strategic advantage within the region. The summit's focus on de-escalation and the securing of trade agreements represent a positive, if limited, contribution to Asean's ongoing efforts to maintain relevance and stability in Southeast Asia. Venezuela accuses U.S. of plotting overthrow. Military buildup intensifies. Recent reports highlight escalating tensions between Venezuela and the United States, with Venezuelan officials strongly asserting that President Donald Trump's administration is actively attempting to overthrow the Maduro government. Attorney General Tarek William Saab stated unequivocally that Trump's objective is to transform Venezuela into a U.S. colony, fueled by accusations of regime change and the desire to seize the nation's significant natural resources, including gold, oil, and copper. This assertion comes amidst growing U.S. military activity in the Caribbean, characterized by the deployment of warships, fighter jets, marines, spy planes, bombers, and drones, framed as a crackdown on drug trafficking and narco-terrorists. Saab emphasized Venezuela's preparedness to resist a potential land invasion, while maintaining a willingness to engage in dialogue, despite the U.S.'s illegitimate claims regarding drug trafficking. The U.S.'s actions have been met with condemnation, particularly following guided missile destroyer USS Gravely's arrival in Trinidad and Tobago, viewed as a military provocation. Venezuela further alleges the capture of a mercenary group with direct ties to the U.S. intelligence agency, suggesting a false flag attack is underway. U.S. Congress members, including Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, have expressed concerns about the legality of U.S. strikes on alleged drug boats and Trump's authority to order them, while anticipating the possibility of future land strikes. The escalating situation is rooted in the U.S.'s refusal to recognize Maduro as Venezuela's legitimate leader. Following a disputed 2024 election, President Maduro has repeatedly accused the U.S. of fabricating a war and orchestrating a false flag operation. The continued U.S. military buildup, including the presence of the U.S. Gerald R. Ford, further exacerbates these tensions, raising fears of a direct confrontation and highlighting the critical stakes involved in the ongoing geopolitical dispute. MAGA hero hands big win to Trump's Latin America strategy. The United States is escalating its strategy in the Western Hemisphere, primarily driven by President Donald Trump's America First agenda and a desire to counter perceived threats from China and Russia. This strategy centers on exerting influence in Latin America, particularly targeting Venezuela under President Nicolas Maduro. The administration's approach involves deploying naval assets, including the U.S. Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group, to intimidate Maduro and potentially initiate combat operations, fueled by claims of drug trafficking and a desire to reshape the region's political landscape. A key element of this strategy is leveraging economic pressure, exemplified by a $20 billion bailout offer contingent on voter support for Javier Milei in Argentina, a candidate strongly aligned with Trump's MAGA movement. This intervention resulted in a significant victory for Milei, demonstrating the administration's willingness to directly influence electoral outcomes. The potential use of military force raises significant legal and political concerns, including the constitutional requirement for congressional authorization to wage war. Despite these reservations, Trump appears intent on circumventing these checks, drawing parallels to past presidents like William McKinley and James Monroe, both of whom engaged in military interventions in the region. Furthermore, the administration is actively countering China's growing influence in Latin America, supporting right-wing leaders like Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele, and targeting countries where China has established strategic partnerships. This includes pressuring Panama over the Panama Canal. A central figure in this strategy is Maria Corina Machado, a Venezuelan opposition leader who has emerged as a favored candidate by the Trump administration. Her strong advocacy and right-wing views align with the MAGA movement, and her potential victory in Venezuela would fulfill multiple Trump goals, including restoring access to Venezuelan oil reserves and promoting democratic values, although critics question the administration's motives. The administration's actions are viewed by some as an attempt to establish American hegemony in the Western Hemisphere, mirroring a historical approach to containing foreign influence. However, concerns remain about the potential for unintended consequences, such as civilian casualties and the destabilization of fragile democracies. The strategy is fundamentally rooted in addressing domestic concerns related to immigration and drug trafficking, reflecting Trump's broader America First policy. NNSA shutdown threatens nuclear security goals. The National Nuclear Security Administration, NNSA, is facing significant challenges due to the ongoing federal government shutdown, jeopardizing its aggressive nuclear security goals set by the Trump administration. Despite receiving funds to maintain weapons laboratories and sites through contractors, the agency was forced to furlough approximately 400 full-time federal employees due to budgetary limitations and legal constraints. This furloughing occurred despite the use of funds typically allocated to troops, Customs and Border Protection, and the U.S. Coast Guard. The NNSA's request to reprogram funds to cover its workforce was denied by the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, further exacerbating the situation. The agency's workload has intensified under the Trump administration, with accelerated timelines for delivering modernized weapons to the Pentagon, including the B-6113 gravity bomb and new Sea-launched cruise missiles. The Biden administration's NSA administrator had previously warned of an unprecedented workload. The shutdown's impact is particularly concerning at key facilities like Pantex in Texas, where new nuclear weapons are assembled, and Y-12 in Tennessee, where enriched uranium is stored. These sites were projected to run out of funds next week, but funding from the Big, Beautiful Bill has provided a temporary reprieve until the end of October. However, the limited nature of this funding means operations will eventually cease. Approximately 400 non-SA employees remain working without pay, while thousands of contractors continue to receive payments through a separate funding source. The agency's inability to fully staff its operations is significantly delaying production processes, as critical steps in weapon manufacturing require the oversight and approval of federal employees. The timeline for completing major weapons programs, including those slated for delivery by 2027 and 2035, is now at risk. Energy Secretary Chris Wright has scrambled to find creative, extra funding to keep contractors employed and facilities open. The situation underscores a sense of urgency for weapons production, driven by global events and the administration's national security priorities. Failure to meet these deadlines could embolden adversaries and undermine the U.S. strategic position. The agency's inability to fully staff its operations is significantly delaying production processes, as critical steps in weapon manufacturing require the oversight and approval of federal employees. Thailand grapples with U.S. tariff rules and exports. Thailand's manufacturing sector is facing significant challenges due to new U.S. tariff rules, particularly concerning regional value content, RVC requirements. Washington has implemented a 19% duty on Thai imports, replacing a previous 6% rate, aiming to curb transshipment, the practice of exporting goods through Thailand before re-exporting them to the U.S., often involving Chinese manufacturers. This strategy is designed to combat unfair trade practices and protect domestic U.S. industries, specifically targeting solar panel imports from Southeast Asian countries. The RVC rule mandates that a certain percentage of a product's value originate from within Thailand, currently targeting 50% for many products, though this is expected to rise to 85% for plywood and roofing materials. Several industries, including electronics at 22.5% RVC, steel 30%, and pharmaceuticals at 35% E, are struggling to meet these requirements, leading to apprehension among manufacturers. 13 industries have yet to provide RVC data, and 10 do not export to the U.S. The Board of Investment (BOI) is encouraging Chinese EV manufacturers to utilize domestically sourced materials, aiming for local content proportions of up to 90% for EV components. Companies like Chang'an and GWM are committed to increasing local content over time. The National EV Policy Committee is promoting EV exports through ease production requirements for manufacturers participating in state incentive schemes. Despite these efforts, concerns remain about a potential slowdown in exports, particularly in the fourth quarter, due to global trade uncertainties, baht appreciation, and a slumping tourism industry. Projected GDP growth for Thailand is 1.82% this year, with export growth of 2.3% and inflation of 0.51%. The JSCCIB emphasizes the importance of compliance with the RVC rule to maintain competitiveness, warning that failure to meet the requirements will result in a 40% tariff. The overall situation highlights a complex interplay of trade regulations and export pressures for Thailand's manufacturing sector. The digest Russia's escalation and the specter of appeasement. Recent developments in the Ukraine conflict highlight a concerning trend: Russia's intensified attacks on civilian targets and the resurgence of the debate surrounding appeasement. The strategic shift involves targeting cities far from the front lines, including rail stations, power supplies, and homes, accompanied by a significant increase in missile and drone strikes. This escalation is juxtaposed with a black and white image referencing the Blitz, symbolizing Ukraine's resilience and prompting questions about Western responses. The situation is further complicated by President Donald Trump's attempts to mediate, repeatedly advocating for a return to the pre-existing front lines and rejecting the provision of long-range Tomahawk missiles, despite growing impatience from the United States. This approach has drawn criticism from figures like Gregory Meeks and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who characterize it as weakness through appeasement. Despite initial optimism, Trump's interactions with President Zelensky proved unproductive, reinforcing the need for a unified Western strategy. While sanctions against Russia's oil companies represent a shift in policy, a significant gap remains between U.S. and European perspectives. Negotiations regarding frozen Russian assets to aid Ukraine have stalled. The historical parallels to appeasement, particularly during the 1930s, are being actively discussed. Figures like Harold Macmillan and Neville Chamberlain's legacy are invoked, reflecting anxieties about escalating the conflict with a nuclear-armed state. Ukrainian perspectives are overwhelmingly critical of concessions, believing that Russia only responds to force. Key figures, including Professor Yevhen Mada and Fedir, emphasize the necessity of destroying Russian military infrastructure to prevent further aggression. The risk of appeasement is viewed as emboldening an authoritarian regime, potentially leading to further territorial gains. Western leaders, including Sir Keir Starmer, have pledged continued support, aiming to provide Ukraine with longer-range weapons. The situation remains precarious, with the potential for a wider conflict underscored by Russia's warnings regarding foreign-supplied weaponry. Inside Syria's ongoing struggle against IS cells, the BBC's reporting highlights the persistent challenge of combating Islamic State, IS cells within Syria, revealing a resurgence in attacks and ongoing detainment efforts. Kurdish authorities are grappling with approximately 8,000 foreign nationals, including 48 countries' citizens, held in prisons like Al-Sina in Hasaka, primarily due to their involvement with IS. These individuals, many stripped of their citizenship, are detained for years without trial, with conditions marked by illness, limited resources, and the emergence of IS-influenced leadership within the prison system. Several key figures, such as Walid Abdul Basit Sheikh Mosa, a young fighter who tragically died while attempting to acquire a motorbike, exemplify the motivations of individuals drawn to IS. The group's recruitment efforts have capitalized on the security vacuum following Bashar al-Assad's ousting, utilizing weapons seized from former regime stockpiles. The detention camps, particularly Raj and Al-Hol, present a complex humanitarian crisis. Approximately 6,000 foreigners, including British nationals, are held alongside their families, many of whom have been arbitrarily detained. These camps, housing over 12 children, are rife with extremist ideology and pose a significant security concern, with Kurdish forces actively attempting to prevent the recruitment of children. British citizens, like Hamza Parvez, are enduring dire conditions within the prisons, facing potential death from illness and lacking hope for repatriation. Others, such as Mahak Aslam and Shayhan Chaudhry, arrived in Syria with humanitarian intentions, but became entangled with IS, now facing indefinite detention and separation from their families. Kurdish forces are proactively monitoring and disrupting potential recruitment efforts, particularly targeting children within the camps, recognizing the potential for a new generation of IS fighters. The ongoing situation underscores the long-term implications of the conflict and the considerable challenges associated with dismantling IS networks and managing the fate of those involved. The situation remains fluid, with continued efforts to identify and neutralize sleeper cells and maintain security within the detention camps. India and China re-established direct flights, signaling improved relations. Following a 5-year hiatus, India and China have reactivated direct flights, marking a significant step in the ongoing efforts to repair strained diplomatic ties. The resumption began with Indigo Flight 6E1703, departing from Kolkata and arriving in Guangzhou, carrying approximately 180 passengers. This action follows a period of heightened tensions, primarily triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic and a deadly border clash in the disputed Himalayan region in 2020. The move represents a tangible indicator of the steadily improving relationship between the two nations. The Indian government emphasized the importance of this development, stating it would facilitate people-to-people contact and the gradual normalization of bilateral exchanges. This signifies a desire to restore traditional interactions and foster greater understanding between the populations. Several key events have contributed to this positive shift. In August, Prime Minister Narendra Modi undertook his first visit to China in 7 years, engaging in a crucial meeting with President Xi Jinping at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. This demonstrated a willingness to engage at the highest levels. Prior to this, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi visited India, focusing on critical discussions surrounding de-escalation, delimitation, and boundary affairs, essential elements for managing the ongoing border dispute. Furthermore, in July, India reinstated the issuance of visas for Chinese tourists, a move that underscores a broader effort to encourage tourism and cultural exchange. The resumption of direct flights is a pivotal development, representing a fundamental step toward normalizing relations following a period of significant friction. The collaborative efforts between the two countries signal a commitment to dialogue and cooperation, aiming to build a more stable and constructive relationship. The future of these restored connections will undoubtedly play a crucial role in regional geopolitics and international relations.